Not at all frightening. I've been writing my whole life. I probably wrote my first book my freshman year in high school, I think, on a computer that would make you laugh. And it was in a black three-ring binder. And I used to, in high school, I'd write and pass them around to my friends, and they'd read it, and then the next one would read it. And anyone who's read my works from my teenage years, and I promise that no one should ever read anyone's works from their teenage years, would tell you that pretty clumsy and sloppy, as might be typical of a young writer, in that every character was someone I knew, slightly changed, with a different name. I wrote, I think, somewhere like 7 or 8 manuscript length works that are all nicely recycled now for the earth, and none of which were any good. A bunch of years ago now, I think 3 or 4 years ago, I did some writing for my summer job. And we had a time machine day, right? So for that day, we were going back to the Middle Ages, and so what I did is, I wrote in this fantasy sort of world for that day, and I thought, this is kind of cool. And as some of you know, then a couple years later, I had to have vocal surgery, and I couldn't talk for 3 weeks. And I started writing in that sort of genre, and what I liked about it is, I don't know any wizards. I don't know any elves. So I could actually make up characters and finally, fully breathe life into characters who are not versions of my friends. And not to say that you don't know right what you should know, and there's bits and pieces of people here and there, and you might recognize them if you know them, but I think that these characters are much more real and much more living. So for me, fantasy was much more liberating from that. And since then, I've started reading a lot of it, and it's fun because real life is not always fun. It's not a real world, which is liberating in its own way, in that it doesn't actually exist. It's a medieval level of technology, which is pretty typical of the genre. So that, what I love about it, there's no iPhones, right? There's no tablets. There's none of the things that often I think contemporary writers find difficult, because if you're trying to create suspense, nothing kills it more than the fact that everybody in the world in their pocket has something that answers almost every question in the world. So at least that's gone. Transportation is much more difficult because it's, no quicker than a horse or something like that. And that is, I think, super liberating because you can create your own world, and it allows you to be very creative and make up the rules, but is also sort of dangerous because you have to follow your own rules. And at least when you're writing contemporary fiction, you're bound by the rules of this world, right? If you drop the water, it's going to hit the floor, and everyone knows that. And having now written about 900 pages worth of stuff, I find myself constantly like, oh gee, what did I say about that? What's the rule about this? Oh. The thing about fantasy is, particularly when you're using magic or something like that, which can be great for solving problems, you have to be respectful of the rules that you set, and you have to set some rules on yourself, or else there's no drama to the story. If a wizard could solve everything with a wave of his hand and a little muttering in Latin, which my wizards use, right? Because I did take Latin for 3 years for something, I guess. I have a significant problem with time, given a full-time job, given a significantly large time commitment to youth softball here in town. My wife nods patiently. And 2 kids, right at 10 and 8, who are busy. So I will back up, though, and tell you that I didn't write anything from the minute that Zoe was born, probably for the first 7 or 8 years of her life, and the first, maybe 5 or 6 years of Molly's life, maybe because I had no time. So inspiration at that point was the problem. I had no ideas. And at least, since I started getting ideas with this, and I think about this stuff all the time, and there's notebooks all over the house and in my car, and so, my challenge is finding time to tame them. And I guess, like, having the ideas was always my difficulty, since in my adult life. Having the ideas is no longer a problem for me. Managing them and trying to round them up, kind of like wild horses or so. That's what I feel like. I have ideas in all these places, and but I have to bring order to this, and that's sort of a challenge. So I'm 100 pages into book 3. So book 3 is tentatively titled Whispers of Spring. I'd originally thought it was just 1 book, and then as I started writing, I started saying, oh, I think I got a lot of stuff. This could be 2 books. And then, it's 3. I'm thinking it's a 4-book arc now. Of course, The Lies of Autumn, which is the first book, takes place in the fall. The Darkest Forest takes place in the winter. Whispers of Spring, as you might imagine, takes place in the spring. So, there are also 4 realms in my little world: a human realm, and a wizard, and elves, and morphs. And so in each book, they're sort of going to each place. So it'll probably be 4. There are, in the Darkest Forest, there are a bunch of new characters. As we get further into Whispers of Spring, there are some new characters there as well. Some of whom will sort of mess things up for the good things that my characters have going. Some are villainous, some are good. Some you're not so sure about. Some I'm not so sure about, and I'm the one writing them. So yeah, there's definitely some new people here, you'll see some old ones disappear. I think the more you experience people and the more that you have friends and you interact with people, the better characters you're drawing. I know that my female characters are far better now than when I was 14, where I probably didn't know really very much, how girls thought. Now, I have a little bit, having been married now for 13 years, I have a little bit better insight. So I think part of it is just watching people, because you want to create characters that are real for people, and so as you watch different people, and you can sort of take from different people, like, oh gee, this person has this little quirk, or this person's really, really serious, and this person's really silly, and then part of it is just you take parts of yourself too. Carrie laughs every time. The question I usually ask you if you say, hey Chuck, I liked your book, is, hey, who's your favorite character? And no matter who you say, I will almost certainly say, oh yeah, I like him too. Oh yeah, I like her too. When I was a kid, I read all kinds of different stuff. So, for example, I love sports, so I read a lot of Matt Christopher books, and I know that my kids have read some of his stuff. Again, he writes about baseball, which, was probably my first love. It was a really dysfunctional love. I did read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I remember, I don't remember, a whole lot about being a super little kid, but I remember being absolutely grieved about Aslan. I mean, not to give it away, right? But it's going to end okay. I loved The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I loved The Velveteen Rabbit, which is a really sweet and sad book. I have a weakness for the tragic sometimes.
He has a question.
How long did it take you from beginning to actually seeing that book?
Yeah.
I guess my short answer is like 40 years. It took me that long, I feel like, to be a good writer, and I had to write a lot of bad stuff to get through that. But from when I started writing the story until the publication was probably about 2 years. The writing itself didn't take very long at all. Of course, I was stuck in the house, unable to speak for 3 weeks. The kids were still in school, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go grocery shopping because, think about it, at some point you will have to speak to someone. And Carrie said, well, why don't you just at least go to the bank? I said, oh, sweetheart, I don't think I can go to the bank. Oh, just pass a note to them. I'm like, oh. I don't think that ends well. That ends in a headline, right? So, I'm stuck in the house. My kids are still in school because blessedly St. John's, got out that year like 3 weeks before. I'd had the surgery. I couldn't do anything. And so I was working 8, 9, 10-hour days, banging away at the keyboard. So I probably got the first draft done in a month. You would love to believe that I map everything out. I don't. So some things are mapped out. So when I started writing book 1, I sort of had a sense of how I thought the whole thing should end up. But in the course of writing it, that actually has changed a little. Like, oh, gee, that's not a good ending at all. And so I've tweaked sort of the ending for book 4, which has not even been written yet. There's some things that I usually plan a few chapters ahead. So I have sort of a general outline of how I think the story is going to go. And I have the ending. I like endings. I'm really happy about my endings of the first 2 books. Spoiler alert, book 3's got a real, jaw-slapping one, too. It's the middle, right? So I got the beginning and the end. And then a lot of times in the middle, just as I'm writing, things will come to me. And even as the process is going on, it'll take sort of different turns. And I think, artists would probably tell you the same thing, that, gee, you have a sense of how you want it to turn out, but it doesn't always turn out the way that you thought sometimes the process takes over. Of course, the ancient Greeks, right, thought inspiration was sort of a goddess. Inspiration is air that you breathe in. It's sort of, you'd inhale this stuff and you get this creative energy, and sometimes it takes you on trips you don't expect, and certainly you have to have some structure, and I think you don't want to ever go into something just writing with no direction. But, at the same time, you do have to let it sort of take you where it's going to take you, and part of that is difficult for a guy like me who, everything is very just so, and so this is a part of my life where, I have to sort of let things not be just so, and that's good for me, right? And then, the self-publication is easier than you would think. I think 10 years ago, we called them vanity presses, and you'd pay somebody to put together a box full of books, and they'd be happy to take your money. Now with the technology, which cuts both ways, right? I mean, they say that they're afraid people are going to stop reading because of technology, but I think the opposite has been true, and I'm actually really surprised at how many paper books I've sold. With the Outcast, I probably sold twice as many paper books as electronic books. With Darkest Forest, it's trending about 50-50. But I think, if you can sit down and grind out this stuff and do the stuff that normally a publisher would do for you, part of which is proofreading, part is copy editing, which is drudgery and formatting and making Microsoft Word play with all these other programs. And then, picking out your cover art. With CreateSpace, which is Amazon's sort of self-publishing platform, it's not all that hard. It's not expensive. Trust me, if this hobby cost me money, it would have been curtailed by now. It's cool that you could get your stuff out there to an audience, and I've sold books apparently in Germany. I've sold books in England and in France. I'm not entirely sure who's buying them. I have an inkling, right? My sister-in-law's in England, but
When you finished writing the book,
yeah.
and 4 or 5 people read it, and you knew you wanted to publish it, what was your first step?
Fantastic. So I can recommend another book to you. So my friend Diane Mulligan wrote a book called The Guide to Self-Publishing. She's self-published 2 books. She was sort of the first person I'd ever heard of who did this, and she teaches at St. John's with me. Her book is free, so you can actually get the book, or at least the ebook, for free, and it answers so many questions. So I would go on Amazon. Amazon has this thing called CreateSpace, in which you can self-publish. And so the first thing you have to do is upload the file itself. And there's all kinds of formatting problems because, of course, you usually write in Microsoft Word, and it doesn't always play nicely. And so, Carrie has heard me banging things around, screaming and yelling when, why doesn't this work? But when you finally get it to the point where Amazon's happy with it, you can go on as well, and they give you all sorts of templates for the cover. I mean, I'm not a designer. I don't have an eye for this stuff, but it's pretty user-friendly. When you're looking for photos, there's a website called, and I got this right from Diane's book, called Shutterstock.com. You can buy a license for a photo, so I want to say it's like $29. I could buy 2 photos, and as long as I sell fewer than 500,000 copies, I'm covered. Don't worry. I'm not close, right? If I sold more, I could just buy the enhanced license. And so I could drop those in, and you do different stuff there. And then they'll help you with marketing and things of this sort. And then, of course, they'll ask you, hey, would you like to be on Kindle too? Yeah, because people read on their Kindles. And, of course, Amazon Kindle and Amazon CreateSpace sort of work together. If you were looking to make money, it's not necessarily a great way to make money, because I think of the $16 or $17, I see 3 of them. What's cool is if you did write a book and you said, gee, I want some people to have it, and if 12 people read my book, I'm delighted. If 20 people, if 100 people do, you don't have to buy a crate of books. And I mean, that was the issue back, when maybe even 10 or 20 years ago, that even if you could convince somebody to publish your book, they do an initial printing, and you better move those copies. And if you don't, well, they're in the trunk of your car, and you better try to sell them to someone. Here, I bought a couple of books. I bring them for events in case you heard it, and you're like, wow, I want to buy it, Chuck. But generally, you go on Amazon, you click on my book, it sends a signal to somewhere, I think in Tennessee, to be honest with you. They print 1 copy for you. And then you tell your friend, I read The Darkest Forest. Oh, this is a great, great book. And she goes on and clicks, and boop, they print a second one. And economically, no one loses, right? I'm not in the hole for this because I certainly can't afford to. Amazon certainly is never in the hole on anything.
These come from Amazon?
So you could ship it on Amazon, and they'll shipping, and I handle nothing. All they do is at the end of the month, they'll send me an electronic check for my royalties for that month, and tell me where stuff has been sold, and Kindle does it separately. And I guess and maybe I'll close with that. I think it's a really liberating thing about today. I think people complain about technology with good reason, right? But I think what's really awesome about technology in this case is when I went to this course at Assabet, the teacher said, look, 10 years ago, somebody could tell you, you're never getting published, and that's it. And there were 6 publishers, and if they didn't like your stuff, you're done. And now, nobody will ever tell you that. If you want to be published, you can be published, and nobody can stop you. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. And, rather than having the gatekeepers here in all these companies, kind of a great message for everybody that technology sometimes levels playing fields and allows people to get stuff out. I mean, if I've sold a few hundred copies, that's a few hundred more than I ever would have sold, in the 1980s or 90s. And, I think if you're interested in it and if it's something that's appealing to you, then, I think it's a great, great opportunity just to get your stuff out there. And if the only people who buy it are your friends and family, well, that's okay too, because they make up a significant portion of my fans. Although I did actually have a fan moment, right? Like, it was great. I saw some kids like, you're Chuck Abdella, the author of The Outcast? Like, yeah, I'm so great to meet you. It's the highlight of my day. I'm like, get out.